Maharaj, thank you for sharing with us your time to be able to discuss with us about reading Srila Prabhupada's books. I know we have a very short period of time together, Maharaj, so kindly accept my humble obeisances. Mancha kalpatarubhyo, sindhubhyo cha patitanam pavnebhyo vaishnavabhyo namo namaha. Maharaj, we would like to hear from you as to why should ISKCON devotees and devotees in general, why should we all read Srila Prabhupada's books every day?
Yeah. Well, the first point is that we practice bhakti, but in order to practice bhakti, we need knowledge. So that's a very important factor. As Prabhupada said, if we have a religion without proper philosophy, then it is mere sentiment. So the bhakti is good, but we have to practice along with some proper knowledge. Srila Prabhupada spent a lot of his time, I don't know how much of his day, but he would get up very early in the morning and start translating and commenting. So he put a great endeavor into those last years when he was traveling around to explain the meaning of Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita and Bhagavad Gita. And this was, of course, twofold. One for the devotees of ISKCON and one for the people in general. So at least the devotees of ISKCON, they should take up that the knowledge that Prabhupada has offered to us and incorporate that into their practice. Otherwise, the practice tends to be sentimental. It hasn't got a solid basis. So that's, let's say, the Shastric reason why we need to study Srila Prabhupada's books. And as I mentioned, the other point is that he put a lot of labor into the books, and he has said the books is the basis. So again, it comes back to the fact that the bhakti needs some tangible basis, so it's not called fanatical. So we do need these books. And so we see that Prabhupada wrote books, but what were the books he wrote? They were scriptures. So we have the Bhagavatam, which is the main scripture of the Gaudiya Sampradaya following Lord Chaitanya. We have the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is a very important work because it explains the life and teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And then we have these other books as well, which follow after that. So they all embody the philosophy that Lord Chaitanya taught, which goes along and is intrinsic to the process of bhakti itself. So within ISKCON, we have Prabhupada presenting all this to us. And Srila Prabhupada has his unique individual way in which he expresses these truths to the people of ISKCON and the wider audience, the whole world. So we should very studiously practice bhakti, and along with that, we have to incorporate the study of his book. At the present moment, we're thinking of how to create a unity in ISKCON, since there is every possibility of divergence and disunity that we see in the modern world. Now nobody can travel anywhere, and this gives rise to everyone doing everything independently. So we have to have some sort of unity within ISKCON. And Srila Prabhupada was also very concerned about that because he saw how the Gaudiya Math, which was established by Bhakti Saraswati Thakur, had fallen apart, dissipated its strength. So he was worried about that. So he wanted to keep ISKCON together. So we have some, let's say, practical means. That is, we have an organizational structure. We have rules and regulations. But the other is the ethos of the teachings of ISKCON, and that is kept together by the teachings of Prabhupada. So if we read his books every day, we can imbibe that spirit as well as the philosophy that Prabhupada presented. So this helps keep ISKCON together.
Maharaj, what was your first encounter with Srila Prabhupada's books?
I was in Japan, I think in 1970. I had graduated from university and I was just taking a little holiday there. And then I met Sudama and Chintamani and a few other devotees who were distributing Godhead magazines on the streets of Tokyo at Ginza. So that was when I first got. So I got a magazine at that time, and I was trying to figure out how to understand it. And then that was the first thing. And they got a few small books. I think Teachings of Prahlad was there. But at that time, the books were not many. There was the abridged Bhagavad Gita of Macmillan, and then the Teachings of Lord Chaitanya and the Krishna book, Nectar Devotion came out. And then there was the old Bhagavatam from Delhi that the devotees used to carry around in 3 volumes. These were the books. There wasn't that many books, at that time. And Isa Upanishad also came out. So there weren't that many books around, and the devotees had a few of those books, but not too many at that time, because they were mainly distributed back to Godhead magazines. So the big books actually weren't readily available, really, at the very beginning. But after I came to India and then came back to Japan, whatever, and gradually then there was a big production of books through BBC, etc. And that's when we got many books. So in the very beginning, not many books were there, but whatever we could get, we would read. So we would, when we were traveling around India with Prabhupada, then we would, read Nectar Devotion or Krishna book or Bhagavad Gita or the Bhagavatam. Those books are our main source of knowledge at that time. So it was a little bit limited, and also the books weren't available. So it was not so convenient as it is now, because even if we don't have books, we can go on internet and get everything off the internet. But it wasn't like that in ancient times, so it was a little more difficult to do things. But nevertheless, we all did that. We studied as much as we could at that time. So that was my first introduction to the books. They weren't too available, but whatever we had, we would read.
Maharaj, you're a prolific author. You're translating so many books of the acharyas. When you were in the 70s, when you were with Prabhupada and you were reading these books, what was the culture amongst ISKCON at that point in time about reading Prabhupada's books? That's my first question. Second is, have you seen this culture of reading books change, increase, decrease, the mood, the intensity? Could you please throw some light from your decades of experience in this?
Well, in those days, it was a daily practice, more or less, the devotees felt they should read. So, of course, there was daily classes, but then on their own also, then devotees would be reading. So they would carry a book with them and read it whenever they could. That's what I would do also, carry a book like Bhagavad Gita, and every time I had some spare time, I would be going to that book and reading something out of it. So that was basically how those devotees were conducting themselves in those days. After that, I don't know actually what happened, but gradually, of course, ISKCON expanded in many ways, and then there were many, they shifted from devotees who were full-time devotees, even the grasses were full-time at that time, to congregational devotees. So the whole mood kind of changed also at that. Maybe it was simultaneous, maybe that's how it happened, but the emphasis seemed to change a little bit after that point. So that could be a reason. I'm not sure if that's the only reason, but that's one of the reasons why. But simultaneously, the books became more available, so it became easier in one sense also. So
sounds quite ironical. Sounds quite ironical that when something has become more available, at least in general, it's observed that the practice of reading it goes down.
But one thing is also that we began to emphasize the book distribution. So most of the people were distributing the books. So I think there's more distribution and less reading at that time. Maybe that's another factor that came in. Those were the last years when Prabhupada was there, the emphasis on book distribution, and then they began to distribute the book. So maybe that was a factor also in the decrease in the reading part, because a lot of them were out there from morning to evening, and then they would be very tired after that, so it wasn't possible for. So that was another factor, because they got into distributing books. That could be a factor also.
Maharaj, we often hear that the books that the purports and the translations given by Srila Prabhupada are the essence of what the whole parampara is speaking. There are not so many devotees out there like yourself. I mean, who could we think of more who's read, translated the commentaries of many Vaishnavacharyas? What is your view and reflection on this statement? Two statements. One, that Srila Prabhupada lives forever in his books, and second, that what Srila Prabhupada has given in the Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita is adequate or enough for us to go back home, back to Godhead, or to practice our bhakti.
Yeah. So it's a matter of one's personal needs. So we get everything there in Chaitanya Charitamrita and Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. the basic philosophy. Sambandha Gyan is there. We get the process of bhakti explained as much as you need. And the goal is sufficiently explained, especially in Srimad Bhagavatam. So we get Sambandha, Abhidheya, Prayojana. Those are all included and elaborated on. And we get a more rasa interpretation of that in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So that kind of balances everything out. So in that sense, everything is there. As well, we have, we say, the influence of Srila Prabhupada's personality also within his commentaries. So that adds also a certain flavor. And we can say that it keeps ISKCON together, and it gives us an ISKCON identity. Also, that particular flavor that Srila Prabhupada has in his particular way he expresses things and the comments that he makes. So that's an added feature. So if we look at the original commentaries, generally they're quite conservative, and they kind of stick to the words in the verse, and that's it. Srila Prabhupada often goes on to comment on so many things, and he'll comment on modern day, events or whatever, or modern trends, etc., like that as well, which they rarely do in the traditional commentaries. So Prabhupada tries to relate all of that philosophy to the present situation. So that also gives a chance to get a new perspective on the verses and their meaning. And so the commentaries are there, but he expands on that and puts it in the mode of the present day. So that we do that. Of course, in the future, present will be something else.
Yes,
we're still related to the present now, but in the future, probably somebody's going to have to do the whole thing all over again, because the present will be 500 years later. So, but anyway, it presents by doing that, also we see Prabhupada's contribution, that he's trying to relate it to contemporary people.
Yes. Maharaj, how do, for sadhakas or devotees who are just starting out their devotional life, how do these books come alive? What does it mean when somebody says Srila Prabhupada lives through the books? What is the practical way of actually relating to this statement and absorbing it in our consciousness and our practice?
Well, of course, the first thing is devotion. Rupa Goswami says in the Nectar of Devotion that you can read this book, but if it's only from the point of view of tarka and logic, then you won't really understand it. So you need ruchi or taste. So we do have to have a devotional attitude when we start reading the books. So the more devotional it is, better. So you get a general devotion. Also, if you have a little understanding and appreciation for Prabhupada, you can have a Prabhupada devotion in there also. So that will help get let's say, a clear understanding of what Prabhupada is trying to present, and also give it a lively mood as well. So in other words, along with the reading, we're not just intellectually analyzing it. That also is there, is necessary. But then we also have that mood of devotion there. And if we combine it with that, then we'll get more out of we'll get more content out of it. Because ultimately, through scripture, whatever it is, whether it's Prabhupada or whether it's Rupa Goswami or Jiva Goswami explaining something, ultimately, if you don't have that devotion, it's not too much value. It could be intellectual value, but ultimately, it won't do anything for your bhakti. But we're interested not in so much intellectual, but the actual devotion that we get out of it. So we should have a devotional attitude when we read these scriptures, and then we can get more out of it.
Maharaj, what could we do in ISKCON in order to increase this culture of reading Srila Prabhupada's books every day?
Well, probably it goes along with our eagerness to advance in bhakti. If we can relate these two things together, then we'll read more. We'll get more interested in the topic. Possibly we have less interest in reading because we have less interest in the topics in them, and we don't quite relate it to how we advance in bhakti. But if we can try to get an impetus to progress in bhakti, an eagerness, so that would increase our eagerness to read scripture.
Yes, Maharaj. Maharaj, often, of course, these days there are so many activities and services happening in ISKCON, and many devotees feel they've got to a point where they feel, we should be able to just chant the holy name, do our basic sadhana, visit the temple, and that should be adequate. And then there are other devotees who very clearly point out and highlight how do leaders manage this? I mean, as leaders, what should the leaders do in order to get their communities, congregations to establish the foundation, which was your first statement in today's discussion, that there should be jnana, there should be a platform of knowledge to progress in bhakti.
Yeah.
And these leaders struggle.
It's an individual, of course, but Prabhupada is very clever in the way he set up our program. So we have Mangalarti and Tulsi Arti, we chant japa, and then we have class every day. So I think that's an institution, more or less, in all ISKCON temples, a Srimad Bhagavatam class. And of all the different scriptures, the Bhagavatam is the main emphasis in our Sampradaya, so we chose Bhagavatam, no other work. So at least if we can attend the Bhagavatam class and get something out of that, we're fulfilling a part of our function at least. I mean, we could do more, of course, but at least if we can do that, then we've got something. Because even that half hour or hour that we spend hearing and studying and questioning, getting answers, etc., that's valuable for us. It helps us, it increases our knowledge, and that gives us a deeper understanding of how to practice bhakti and how to attain the goal and what the goal is.
Maharaj, I would like to ask you a personal question. What impact has it had in your personal bhakti life by reading Prabhupada's books every day, which could encourage others to do the same?
Well, I think what happened was, I forgot to mention this in the beginning, that was that when I first went to, I was in Japan, and then Prabhupada was, I met the devotees. After about 6 months, then they said, Prabhupada come. And so Prabhupada came there in late August, just before Janmashtami. He was there to negotiate with the printing press there in Japan for printing the Krishna book and other books. So then they took me to meet Prabhupada at that time. The printing company had gave him a little house, Japanese house there. He was there with a few devotees, so they took me there. And I wasn't even a devotee at the time. I really didn't know what to do. But they sat me down in front of Prabhupada. He was sitting at his desk on the floor, and then he was looking at me. They kind of introduced me. I don't know exactly what happened. Then he pulled out the Krishna book, and he gave it to me, and he said, "Start reading." So that was my introduction. That's how I started reading. So then I was reading the introduction, the little introduction there, and then he said, "Okay, you keep reading until you don't understand something, then you ask me a question." That's how I began reading books.
And your first instance of reading was with Srila Prabhupada?
Well, one of those books, yeah. Before that, we just had a few Back to Godhead bags.
Right. I mean,
because I said we had teachings of Prahlad and a few things like that. We didn't really have anything,
But it also seems that from what you just described, it wasn't just reading. Srila Prabhupada also asked you a few things, or you asked him like that. It was more like a charcha, a discussion, a study.
Well, actually, he gave me the book and said, "Start reading it." So I read it aloud, and then he said, "When you have to have a question, you ask." And then he said, then he looked at, "Where's everybody else?" And he called all the devotees and said, "Yeah, you're not listening. You come. You have to listen also." Don't think that you know everything. So did
Srila Prabhupada also give you a personal instruction to translate and write?
Well, later on, one time he said, "Yeah, what you do is you try to understand this philosophy." That was his instruction. You try to understand this philosophy. That was a general instruction, but I took that to heart more than anything else. So based on that, then that expands into reading and studying and translating and whatever.
Maharaj, devotees must be approaching you sometimes to find out the problems that they face in reading, how should they read, etc. What are the top one, two or three things that you feel are real obstacles that devotees are facing in reading, and what could they do to remedy that situation?
Yeah. Well, one is no time. Is obvious for a lot of people, especially because most of the people are congregation and they work and have a family. So it is, difficult to regulate everything. So they can manage to chant their rounds and maybe do a little arti in the morning in their house. That's as much as they can get in. So the time is one big factor. How to just arrange your day to get that in. Now we do have in the modern world, we have all this audio stuff, so you can hear things when you're driving or when you're on a train or whatever like that. So we have a little facility in the modern world which we didn't have when I was there, but we have a little more facility now, so that at least we get some time when we can contemplate the philosophy and the words of Prabhupada. So that's there to make up for everybody's busier and busier in the modern world. So time is one thing. Yeah, there's probably lack of taste. People they practice bhakti, but they just develop a lack of taste, not only in reading, even in chanting. They'll do it, but it's just like a mechanical process. So as we go on in devotional service, we just take things for granted, and it becomes like a habit that we just have to do. What you can say is like a vaidhi bhakti with very little taste in it. So that's a little bit of an obstacle. Also, once we get to that stage, then it's rather difficult to inspire people to do a little more. So lack of taste, you can say, it's a second factor probably there. Now how do we solve that? One is association. If we have association devotees who are enthusiastic to read and chant and do their bhakti, then this can be an inspiration for other people. And it's very easy. They just associate with sometime, and then they take it up also very nicely. And maybe the other point is that the obstacle is that maybe that we heard this all before. You're not the body, the soul, the same old things coming up again. So you get the same topics coming up a lot. And it's not Prabhupada's fault, because it's also there in the scripture itself. Bhagavad Gita is pushing the same point many times in the same way. That's there. So scriptures do this because they often do what is called repetition in order to emphasize the point, because we don't understand it properly. We don't accept it properly. So therefore, the repetition is there so that we can meditate on that and try to incorporate it more practically into our life. So if they take a more practical approach to the philosophy and try to incorporate it into their life rather than leave it as an abstraction in philosophy, then this may help them develop a little attraction for how to incorporate not the body or and the soul into my daily life like that, and to figure out how to do that, or make it a challenge for themselves. Then this could help them, enliven them to read more.
Maharaj, is these three aspects put together, they also sometimes lead, we hear from devotees that they get overwhelmed when they see the amount of books that they have from Srila Prabhupada. Now, what to say of the other books? They look at it and they get overwhelmed. How could one really overcome those fears, apprehensions? Obviously, if we create more time, we have some taste, we'd like to move forward. But where to break that cycle? You alluded to the person Bhagavat. Could you share a little bit more about the relationship between the person Bhagavat and the book Bhagavat, and how they help each other or nurture each other?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, let's say the challenge is always there. We will fear something that we haven't done before, or and be a little reluctant. And also, of course, it takes a little effort to do anything. So even putting forth a little effort is a little bit difficult for us sometimes, because we're so exhausted from everything else. But that is there also. One thing, of course, is that there's so much vast literature is there. Even the Bhagavatam itself is vast. Big Chaitanya's covered it. No one should be really frightened of that, because they can just take a little section of that, a few paragraphs, and if you can absorb the content nicely, then that's good. Yeah? So whatever little bit you do read, if you can get some good content out of that you can apply to your life, that's the best thing. Rather than try to read everything and just superficially cover it. So I've read the whole Bhagavatam, but you can actually take a little section and try to understand it more, and how to make it practical in your life. In other words, you can get the essence out of that. That is more important than just trying to cover everything. So that probably is, we can say, the way to approach it. Whatever time you do have, try to understand what the real essence of that message is, and then try to apply that.
That's a very valuable tip, Maharaj. To avoid a consumption mentality, but to focus on absorbing their sense and application. Sorry to interrupt.
Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself says that, we try to be the saragrahis, or the acceptors of the ethics. So we're not looking for all the details and whatever. We're trying to understand the main principles by which bhakti works, and the main principles of the Gaudiya philosophy and the conduct and everything we do, and then put all that together so that it creates a mode by which we can advance in devotional service. So it's to help us develop our inner devotion, the whole thing. So if we take that point of view from what our reading, then it'll be a little more enlivening for us. And even if we do a little bit of that, we get a little enlivened every day by that, and that's good for us. So we don't have to think about, well, how much can I accomplish with all the books? We just do a little bit at a time, and eventually Krishna will make some arrangement for us by which we'll get more time so we can read more.
Yes, Maharaj. Maharaj, on this topic of the person Bhagavad, and especially the leadership, we are celebrating and we're trying to emphasize on the aspect of reading Prabhupada's books every day. You are currently also part of the executive committee of the GBC body. What message would you like to give to the leaders of ISKCON in terms of how they can organize their communities and what they must do to encourage devotees to read Prabhupada's books?
Well, it's the responsibility of the leaders to give shelter to all the devotees under them, and to nourish their devotional creepers. So that's the ultimate responsibility. Of course, we also have to take care of them in other ways, mentally, physically, socially, etc. But ultimately, it is the nourishing the creeper of devotion. So the books are integral for that.
Yes,
we can't separate the nourishment of bhakti without books. So in that sense, they have to do that. So then they say, well, how practically we should do that? So the problem, because people don't have time.
Yes.
Now, most temples are congregational oriented now, so we can't insist that you're going to study 3 hours a day. Make a vow to study 3 hours a day, and then you won't be doing your work or whatever. So that's not practical. As I said, at least the class, maybe emphasize the class element there. You can sacrifice at least in the morning, half an hour, 3/4 of an hour for that class, and make it as productive as possible. If you're giving the class, fine, then you make it productive. So that people can get something that's valuable for them in their conduct of bhakti. Or if somebody else is giving, then you urge them to take that attitude of making the Bhagavatam a practical, more practical rather than theoretical. Yes. So we can emphasize that. Then people get more taste automatically, and this automatically get a little more enthusiasm to read things, even on their own.
Yes. Yes, Maharaj, it's an observation that as human beings, we tend to put our energy where we think we'll get some benefit. And as you just described, if we really feel some benefit to our personal lives, to our spiritual lives, then obviously we'll start paying attention to that. Srila Prabhupada Maharaj, my last question is, Srila Prabhupada mentioned to devotees often that try to reorganize your life in such a way that you can give more time to Krishna consciousness, to practicing bhakti. So from the time where we are doing a 1 or 2 hours program to a time, Maharaj, how does the whole life of a person, from beginning to end, how does that map with increasing time for bhakti, increasing time for absorption in scriptures, and creating this very important foundation that you said, which is going to give us the springboard to progress? Yeah.
Well, varnashramically speaking, they're very clever. So you have a student period. And that's where you do all your study. Then you have the grasta period. You're not expected to study so much. They know that you have a family, you have to have your occupation, so you're going to have time. Even then, if you look at their schedule in the varnashram system, then this is for Brahmins particularly, afternoon time was the time for study. Then you would recite Puranas or something in the afternoon for an hour at least. maybe in the evening. So there was a little time there. But then it's understood that generally you don't have so much time, but at least you do the basics. Yeah? And then when you take vanaprastha, then of course you have much more time because you have nothing else to do. So that's the retirement time after 50 years or after the children are grown up. And of course, if you can, you take sannyas. So varnashically speaking, then you would have more time before and after your grihastha period where you're raising children. that would be the basic idea where you. So we can't expect the grihasthas to be, full time and doing everything exactly like, an ideal situation. So something has to be sacrificed there. That means you have to be kind of limit things to some degree. And then after that, then you're more free to do that. So it's also the responsibility of the grihastha to make sure that he doesn't sacrifice his family for bhakti. He has to balance up the two things there. But nevertheless, the future is that in the future, then he will have more time, and that's when he takes retired life and does that. That's the varnashramic mode like that. Now, of course, in the modern world, we don't quite have a varnashram, so we don't have a brahmacharya ashram in the Western world as such, and people grow up and then maybe join without any training at all, and then they become a devotee within their congregational devotee. So a little disadvantage because in the original system, you were trained up already. So then you know that you have to do this and you have to do this, and you also develop some taste. Now we just go into it as a grihastha. Then you have to start developing your taste there. So it's a little more difficult because then you have to start trying to squeeze all those things into your life. And they're new things. Whereas previously, if you were brahmachari, it wasn't new, it was already there. So a little more difficult now in the modern world where we don't have that varnashram system. Nevertheless, we do have mercy of Lord Chaitanya. If nothing else works, so that Lord Chaitanya says whether you're a grihastha or a sannyasi or a brahmachari or whatever, it doesn't really matter. You chant the holy name and you worship Krishna. You do devotional service. So the grihasthas particularly just have to strive somehow or other to get at least the minimum in there, and later on they can expect to do more.
You're right, Maharaj. As grihasthas, we just have to somehow or the other figure out how to do it, but it remains a challenge. And the modern world and modern times are not becoming easier. It's not that the promised, promised goal of technology and the world that our lives will become easier. Somehow we see the other way around. Time is becoming even less. So, but as you said, we have Mahaprabhu's mercy. We have the blessings of Vaishnavas like yourselves. And we hope and pray that we can continue to engage in bhakti properly with the right attitude and proper foundation in Srila Prabhupada's books. Maharaj, I'm very grateful to you for your time today, for giving us time at the Ministry of Education. And we hope to keep hearing from you in the future. Thank you so much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Okay.
Hare Krishna. Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Rama